Welcome to Haunting Whispers. Tonight, as the rain falls softly, we'll share some true scary stories to help you relax and fall asleep. And comment where are you watching from and the time you're watching this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story: I grew up in a small town where kids vanished without a trace. Now I know why. I grew up in a small old town in Maine that most people wouldn't recognize by name. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, where the streets are quiet after dark, and where the past lingers like a heavy fog that never quite clears. I moved away years ago, but I still find myself thinking about that town, especially at night when sleep evades me. There's something about the darkness that brings back the memories, the kind you try to forget but can never really shake. When I was a kid, the town had this strange, almost otherworldly atmosphere. It was hard to put into words, but there was a feeling, a deep unease, that we all sensed but never talked about. The adults called it superstition, the kind of thing that happens in every small town. But we kids knew better. We heard the stories, the whispers in the schoolyard, the tales passed down from older siblings. It was always about children going missing, about kids who would wander off and never come back. It started with the little things. Toys left on porches would disappear. Bikes abandoned on the sidewalk would be gone the next morning, even when the chains were still locked. Parents would write it off as pranks or the work of some petty thief. But the kids knew better. We always did. The first time I really understood the fear was when a boy from my class, Jamie, vanished. We were in third grade, and Jamie was the kind of kid everyone liked. Always laughing, always with a joke on his lips. He was the first to dare anyone to go into the sewers, a place we all avoided. He said he'd heard voices down there, that something was calling to him. None of us believed him, not really, but we didn't want to test it either. One day, Jamie didn't show up for school. It wasn't unusual at first. Kids get sick or go on trips without much notice. But when a week passed and Jamie still wasn't back, the adults started to worry. They searched the town, the woods, even drained part of the river. Nothing. No one talked about the sewers, though. Not even when someone found his sneaker by the storm drain near the old paper mill. The one with the faded sign and the rusted gates. The cops said it probably washed down from somewhere, that it didn't mean anything. But we knew. After Jamie, there were more. A girl from the next street over, twins who lived near the library, a little boy from the outskirts who just started kindergarten. One by one they vanished, and the town grew quieter, like the life had been sucked out of it. The laughter of children faded, replaced by the whispers of the adults who were now too scared to let us out of their sight. But it didn't matter. When someone or something wanted you, it would find you. I remember one night, lying in bed, listening to the rain patter against my window. I was half asleep when I heard it, a voice, soft and melodic, like a lullaby. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the street. I crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. There was nothing there, just the empty street, the old street lamp flickering like it always did. But the voice didn't stop. It called my name, sweet and inviting, like it was promising something wonderful. I wanted to go to it, to step out into the rain and follow that voice wherever it led. But I didn't. I don't know why, but something in me knew better. I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers over my head, trying to block out the sound. Eventually I fell asleep, and when I woke up, it was morning. Years passed, and the disappearances slowed, then stopped altogether. But the town was never the same. Some families moved away, unable to bear the weight of the losses. Others stayed, trying to forget, to pretend like nothing had happened. But those of us who grew up there, who lived through it, we never forgot. We never could. Now, as an adult, I avoid small towns. I stay away from old storm drains and abandoned buildings, and I never ever listen to strange voices in the night. But every now and then when I'm lying in bed, just on the edge of sleep, I hear that lullaby again. And I remember the missing children, the darkened streets, and the town that kept its secrets close, buried deep beneath the surface, waiting for the day when it might need to feed again. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else remembers, if the story still lingers in the minds of those who left. But I don't ask, because some things are better left forgotten. Or at least, that's what I tell myself when the night comes creeping in. And then there are the balloons. Red ones. I used to see them sometimes, floating by the riverbank or caught in the branches of a tree. I always thought they were just left over from some birthday party, but now looking back, I'm not so sure. I still see them in my dreams, bright and crimson, drifting silently down empty streets. It's strange how something so innocent can fill you with such dread. About a week ago, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in shaky, almost childlike handwriting. Inside, there was a single photograph, grainy, black and white, like it was taken decades ago. It was a picture of a group of kids standing in front of the old library in my hometown, smiling at the camera. But there was something wrong. In the background, just behind the children, there was a figure. A tall, thin man in a suit, his face obscured by shadow, and at his feet a red balloon. My heart pounded as I stared at the photo, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. I hadn't thought about that place in years, and now it was coming back to haunt me. The letter didn't include a note or an explanation, just that single, haunting image. I wanted to throw it away, to pretend I never saw it, but something stopped me. Instead, I placed it in a drawer and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't. 2 nights ago, I heard the voice again, the same soft, melodic lullaby, drifting through the air like it had years ago. This time, though, it wasn't outside my window. It was in my house, just outside my bedroom door. I froze, too terrified to move, as the voice called my name, over and over, growing louder with each repetition. When I finally mustered the courage to open the door, there was nothing there, just the dark, empty hallway. But on the floor, right outside my bedroom, was a red balloon, bobbing slightly as if someone had just let it go. I knew then that it wasn't over, that whatever haunted that town hadn't forgotten me. It had found me again, and this time, it wouldn't let go. Last night, I made a decision. I'm going back to that town, back to where it all started. I don't know what I'll find, but I can't keep running. Whatever this thing is, it's coming for me. And if I'm going to stop it, I need to confront it. I booked a ticket for the first flight out tomorrow morning. I haven't told anyone where I'm going. I'm not sure I'll come back. But there's one thing I know for certain. I'm not the only one it's after. And if I don't do something, if I don't end this, it will keep hunting, keep feeding until there's nothing left. So, if you're reading this, be careful. Pay attention to the signs, the missing children, the voices, the balloons. And if you ever hear a lullaby in the night, don't listen. Whatever you do, don't follow it. Because once it finds you, it never lets go. But what came next was far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. Story 2. I led a secret mission during the Cold War. Today I expose what happened. My name is Captain James Jim Carter, and this is the account of Operation Black Frost. This story is not one for the faint-hearted, nor for those who seek comfort in the familiar. It's a tale of darkness, treachery, and the cold, unforgiving grip of fear that comes from confronting the unknown. In the winter of 1962, deep into the Cold War, I was part of a covert task force sent by the United States to infiltrate the frozen wilderness of Siberia. Our mission was to track down and eliminate a high-ranking Soviet official, Dmitry Ivanov, who was believed to be overseeing a top-secret government experiment. The nature of the experiment was unknown, but the little intelligence we had suggested it was a threat unlike anything we had encountered before. Our team consisted of 9 soldiers, each handpicked for their unique skills and unwavering resolve. There was Lieutenant John "Johnny" Rourke, my second in command, a man of few words but immense bravery. Sergeant William "Bill" Turner, a grizzled veteran with an encyclopedic knowledge of explosives. Corporal David "Dave" Hernandez, our communications expert, whose quick wit often lightened the mood. Private First Class Samuel "Sammy" Lee, a sharpshooter with nerves of steel. Private Gregory "Greg" Thompson, our medic, whose calm demeanor under pressure was a beacon of hope. Private Richard "Rick" Davis, a scout with an uncanny ability to navigate the harshest terrains. Private Andrew "Andy" Johnson, our engineer, capable of making or breaking anything mechanical. Finally, Private Robert "Bobby" Kim, a linguist and cryptographer essential for deciphering Russian communications. We were dropped into the heart of Siberia under the cover of night, our breath visible in the frigid air as we trudged through knee-deep snow. The cold was merciless, cutting through our gear and chilling us to the bone. We moved swiftly and silently, each step taking us closer to our target and deeper into the unknown. Our journey began uneventfully, but as the days passed, an oppressive sense of dread settled over us. The forest around us seemed alive, the trees whispering secrets and shadows moving just out of sight. We had been trained to handle fear, but this was different. It was as if the very land was warning us to turn back. On the third night, we set up camp near an abandoned village, its dilapidated buildings standing as silent witnesses to some long-forgotten tragedy. As we huddled around a small fire, the wind howling outside, Dave picked up a faint transmission on his radio. It was in Russian, and Bobby quickly translated. It was a distress signal originating from within the village. Against our better judgment, we decided to investigate. The village was eerily quiet, our footsteps echoing off the crumbling walls. We followed the signal to a small church at the edge of the village. The door creaked open, revealing a scene of horror. Bodies, frozen and contorted in agony, lay strewn across the floor. Their eyes were wide with terror, mouths frozen mid-scream. At the altar, a lone figure sat slumped over, clutching a radio. It was a Soviet soldier, his face twisted in fear, fingers frozen to the bone. "What the hell happened here?" Rick muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," Johnny replied, his eyes scanning the shadows. As we turned to leave, the radio crackled to life. Static filled the room, followed by a voice, distorted and barely audible. "They are coming, the shadows." Before we could react, the church doors slammed shut and the temperature plummeted. The shadows around us seemed to come alive, writhing and twisting, as if possessed by some malevolent force. Panic set in, and we fired blindly into the darkness. The shadows dissipated, but not before claiming Sammy. He vanished into the darkness, his screams echoing long after he was gone. We fled the village, our morale shattered and our numbers reduced. The forest seemed more hostile than ever, the shadows watching our every move. We pressed on, driven by duty and the need for answers. Days turned into weeks, and our supplies dwindled. The cold was relentless, sapping our strength and will to continue. Then we found it, a hidden facility, buried deep within the mountains. It was heavily guarded, but we were determined to complete our mission. Under the cover of darkness, we infiltrated the facility. What we found inside was beyond comprehension. It was a laboratory, filled with strange devices and jars containing grotesque specimens. The air was thick with the stench of decay and chemicals. At the center of it all was Dmitry Ivanov, overseeing an experiment that defied all logic. He was using the shadows themselves, harnessing their malevolent energy to create weapons of unimaginable power. The shadows were alive, feeding on fear and pain, growing stronger with each passing moment. We attempted to sabotage the facility, but the shadows fought back. One by one, my men were taken. Bill was torn apart by unseen forces, his screams filling the air. Greg was dragged into the darkness, his fate unknown. Rick and Andy were consumed by the shadows, their bodies disappearing without a trace. Dave and Bobby fought valiantly, but they too fell to the relentless onslaught. In the end, it was just Johnny and me. We confronted Ivanov, but he was beyond reason, consumed by the power he had unleashed. In a final act of desperation, Johnny detonated the explosives we had planted, destroying the facility and the horrors within. I barely escaped, my body battered and broken. I wandered through the snow for days, the shadows still haunting my every step. Eventually, I was found by a Soviet patrol and taken prisoner. They never believed my story, and I spent years in a Siberian gulag, haunted by the memories of that fateful mission. The gulag was a place of misery and despair, but it was nothing compared to the horrors I had faced in that cursed forest. The other prisoners were hardened criminals, spies, and political dissidents, but even they sensed that something was different about me. They kept their distance, whispering about the haunted American who spoke of shadows and unseen terrors. Years passed in a blur of hard labor, starvation, and the bitter cold. The guards took pleasure in our suffering, and any sign of weakness was met with brutal punishment. I learned to keep my head down, to endure the pain and the fear. But no matter how much I tried to bury the memories, the shadows were always there, lurking at the edges of my vision, whispering in the dead of night. one particularly harsh winter when the cold was so intense it felt like knives slicing through our flesh. I befriended a fellow prisoner named Sergei. He was a former KGB operative, a man of few words but with eyes that spoke volumes. He had seen things that made my stories of shadows seem almost mundane. We formed an unspoken bond, finding solace in each other's company amidst the relentless bleakness of the Gulag. One night, as we huddled together for warmth in our barracks, Sergei leaned in and whispered to me, "I believe you, Jim. About the shadows, I've seen them too." I stared at him, searching his eyes for any hint of deceit, but found only sincerity. "What do you mean?" "Before I was imprisoned here, I was part of an operation similar to yours," Sergei explained. "We were sent to investigate a remote research facility in the Ural Mountains. What we found there, it was beyond comprehension. The scientists were experimenting with something they called Project Noknoizver, the Night Beast. They were trying to harness the energy of the shadows to create weapons that could strike fear into the hearts of our enemies." My blood ran cold as he spoke. "What happened to your team?" "They were all taken," Sergei said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The shadows consumed them, one by one. I barely escaped with my life, just like you. But I was captured and thrown into this hellhole, and no one believed my story." As Sergei spoke, a plan began to form in my mind. If there was another facility, another project like Ivanov's, then we had to find it. We had to stop it, once and for all. The shadows could not be allowed to spread their darkness any further. "Sergei, we have to get out of here," I said, my voice filled with determination. "We have to find that facility and destroy it." Sergei nodded, his eyes gleaming with a newfound resolve. "But how? This place is a fortress. Escape is nearly impossible." "We'll find a way," I replied. "We have to." The next few weeks were a blur of planning and preparation. We gathered what little resources we could, bartering with other prisoners for tools and information. It was dangerous work, and more than once we came close to being discovered by the guards. But desperation drove us forward, the knowledge that we were the only ones who could stop the shadows from spreading their terror. Finally, the night of our escape arrived. A brutal snowstorm raged outside, providing the perfect cover for our plan. Under the guise of a routine work detail, we managed to slip away from the main camp, making our way towards the outer perimeter. The cold was intense, sapping our strength with every step, but we pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. We reached the outer fence, a towering barrier of barbed wire and electrified steel. Using the tools we had painstakingly gathered, we managed to cut our way through, slipping into the frozen wilderness beyond. The storm battered us mercilessly, but it also covered our tracks, buying us precious time. For days, we traveled through the snow, surviving on whatever scraps of food we could find. The shadows were ever present, watching, waiting. But Sergei and I were determined, refusing to give in to the fear that gnawed at our minds. Finally, we reached the Ural Mountains, their jagged peaks rising like silent sentinels against the sky. Sergei led the way, his knowledge of the terrain guiding us to the hidden facility. As we approached, a sense of dread settled over me, the memories of that fateful mission flooding back in vivid detail. The facility was much like the one we had encountered in Siberia, an ominous structure of concrete and steel, hidden deep within the mountains. We watched from a distance, observing the guards and the routine of the compound. It was heavily fortified, but we were prepared to face whatever dangers lay within. Under the cover of darkness, we made our move, slipping past the outer defenses and into the heart of the facility. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of chemicals and decay. We crept through the dimly lit corridors, our hearts pounding in our chests. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more malevolent, as we neared the central chamber. And there, at the center of it all, we found him. Dmitry Ivanov, the architect of this madness. He stood before a massive machine, its mechanisms pulsating with a sickly, otherworldly light. The air crackled with energy, the shadows swirling around him like a living shroud. "You should not have come here," Ivanov said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You cannot stop what has already been set in motion." "We'll see about that," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. As we moved to sabotage the machine, the shadows attacked, lashing out with tendrils of darkness that sought to envelop us. Sergei and I fought desperately, our bullets seemingly ineffective against the intangible foe. The shadows fed off our fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. In the chaos, Sergei was dragged into the darkness, his screams echoing through the chamber. I fought on, determined to finish what we had started. With a final, desperate act, I managed to overload the machine, causing it to explode in a blinding flash of light. The shadows recoiled, their hold on reality weakening. But as the facility began to collapse around me, I realized the true horror of our situation. The shadows were not defeated, they were merely contained. And with Ivanov's death, their malevolence was unleashed upon the world. I barely escaped the facility, stumbling through the snow as the mountain trembled and collapsed behind me. I wandered for days, the shadows still haunting my every step. Eventually, I was found by a rescue team, my body battered and broken, my mind shattered by the horrors I had witnessed. I was brought back to the United States, where I was debriefed and then quietly discharged. They tried to bury the truth, to silence me with threats and promises. But I know the shadows are still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, as I sit here in the quiet solitude of my home, I can feel them watching me. The shadows are always watching, always waiting, and once they have marked you, there is no escape. As the shadows deepened, something sinister stirred in the dark. Story 3. I found a mysterious book that lets me write my future. Chapter 1. The Bookstore. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quiet street, as a young man named Kai strolled along the pavement, his thoughts heavy. The cool evening breeze rustled the leaves of the trees lining the road, and the occasional car passed by with a low hum. Kai's mind was elsewhere, distracted by the recent changes in his life. He had dropped out of college just a few weeks ago, a decision that still weighed heavily on him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was the right choice. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out to see that it was a call from Sarah, an old friend from college. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey, Kai," Sarah's voice came through, warm and familiar. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," Kai replied, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. "Just figuring things out, you know?" "I get it," Sarah said softly. "It's a big change. I just wanted to check in on you. College isn't the same without you around." "Yeah, well, it wasn't really for me," Kai said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I needed to find my own path." They talked for a while longer, reminiscing about old times and discussing their plans for the future. But as the conversation wound down, Kai's phone suddenly lost signal, and the call dropped. He stared at the screen in frustration, trying to reconnect, but the signal was gone. Sighing, Kai continued walking, his mood darker now. As he walked past rows of shops, his attention was caught by a small bookstore with a sign in the window that read, "Free Wi-Fi." Deciding to take a break and try to reconnect, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air inside the bookstore was thick with the scent of old paper and leather. To his right, a man sat in a worn armchair, engrossed in a book, barely noticing Kai's entrance. Shelves lined with books stretched vertically from the entrance, creating narrow aisles that led deeper into the store. The walls were adorned with framed newspapers, some of them yellowed with age, chronicling events from years past. Kai walked in further, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath him. As he pulled out his phone to connect to the Wi-Fi, 2 networks appeared on his screen. Confused, he looked up and approached the store owner, who was standing behind a counter, absorbed in a book of his own. "Excuse me," Kai asked, his voice cutting through the silence. "What's the name of the store's Wi-Fi?" The man didn't respond, his eyes still fixed on the pages in front of him. Kai tried again, a bit louder this time. "Hey, what's the Wi-Fi name?" The store owner finally looked up, his expression blank. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, dressed in an orange shirt and gray pants. Without a word, he closed his book and approached Kai, moving a bit too close for comfort. "You have to pick out a book," the man said in a low voice. "A card with the Wi-Fi name and password is hidden inside one of them." Kai hesitated but nodded, turning to the nearest shelf. He reached for the first book his eyes landed on, but after flipping through the pages, he found nothing. He turned to ask the man for help again, only to find him standing right behind him, much closer than before. The man's presence was unsettling, and Kai felt a chill run down his spine. "There's nothing in this one," Kai said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Not all the books have them," the man replied, his voice flat. "Otherwise, people wouldn't stay long or even look at the books." Kai put the book back on the shelf, feeling increasingly uneasy. He began to browse through the aisles, spending a few minutes searching for the elusive Wi-Fi card. As he scanned the shelves, a strange book cover caught his eye. The title, Life, was embossed in faded gold letters. Curiosity piqued. Kai pulled the book from the shelf, but as he did, he felt a sharp pain in his hand, causing him to drop the book. He looked down to see a small cut on his palm, blood trickling from the wound. Startled, he noticed that the book had 4 metallic faces on its corners, each one bearing a sinister grin. The title on the cover now read, The Life of Kai. A shiver ran down his spine. "What the hell?" he muttered to himself. The book was about someone with his name. The coincidence was too strange to ignore. He opened the book, skimming through the pages, and was shocked to find that the events described were eerily familiar. They were about him. Flipping back to the beginning, Kai's breath caught in his throat. The book started with his birth date, the hospital where he was born, and even the names of his parents. Panic set in as he realized that everything he was reading was an exact record of his life. In disbelief, Kai walked quickly to the front of the store to confront the owner, but the man was nowhere to be found. The store was empty, the silence oppressive. He dropped the book to the floor and bolted out of the store, heart pounding in his chest. The streets outside were a blur as he rushed home, his mind racing. Had someone been stalking him? How else could this book exist? The thought of it made his skin crawl as he hurried home, bumping into people as he went, looking over his shoulder every few seconds. Once home, Kai locked all the windows and drew the curtains tight, his paranoia mounting. He spent hours pacing around, trying to make sense of what he had just experienced. Eventually, he decided to take a shower, hoping it would clear his head. But as he stepped out, drying his hair, he froze in horror. The book was there, lying on his dashboard as if it had never left the store. "What the fuck?" Kai yelled, his voice shaking. He grabbed a metal pole from his closet and searched the house, but there was no sign of anyone. Slowly, he approached the book, his heart thudding in his chest. This time, he was determined to destroy it. He took the book outside, doused it in lighter fluid, and set it on fire. He watched as the flames consumed it, but when the fire died down, the book remained completely unharmed, as if nothing had happened. Panic turned to exhaustion as he tried everything, throwing it away, smashing it with an axe, yet the book persisted, always returning unscathed. Finally, Kai sat down in the living room, the book lying on the table in front of him. He was tired, scared, and out of options. Opening it once more, he noticed something new. Red words scrawled on the inside of the cover that hadn't been there before. Whoever touches the book and offers their blood will have their life recorded in this book from the day they were born to the current day. Kai felt a cold dread settle in the pit of his stomach. He flipped through the pages, which now contained every detail of his life, right up to the moment he was currently reading. The other half of the book, however, was blank. As he turned to the last page with writing, something fell out. A fancy-looking pen with a glass tube in the middle, filled with what looked like red ink. The pen was silver with a creepy, smiling face etched into the metal. More words appeared inside the back cover of the book. "With this pen, you can write on the empty pages, and it will happen. No other pen will work. The ink in this pen is the blood of the book's holder." Kai's mind raced. "So this ink, it's my blood? Is that why I felt that bite at the store?" He examined the pen, noting the eerie smiles on the metal faces. Tentatively, he decided to test the book's power. He wrote, "Kai saw a rat run across the room." For a moment, nothing happened, and he wondered if it was all just a sick joke. But as he stood up to leave the room, he heard scratching noises coming from a stack of boxes in the corner. Suddenly, a black rat darted out, running across the room just as he had written. It startled him, and he realized with a shock that the book had made it happen. Kai returned to the book, his hands trembling. The text on the page had updated itself, now detailing the rat's appearance and his reaction. He turned to the back cover and saw new words glowing beneath the first rule. When an event is written about the holder and the events leading up to the specified event are not clearly detailed, the book will fill in the gaps leading up to the event, good or bad. Kai's heart sank. He realized that the book had a mind of its own, capable of twisting his words into reality. The careless way he had written about the rat had caused it to frighten him. The book could be dangerous if not used with extreme caution. He closed the book, feeling the weight of its power. Should he continue writing in it? The thought of having control over his own fate was tempting, but the potential consequences were terrifying. He decided to lock the book in his dresser drawer and try to sleep, but his mind raced with the possibilities and the dangers that the book presented. What they thought was over was only the start of a living hell. Story 4. I've been waking up in the tunnel system beneath my town. My therapist priest said I should write down what happened to me. He said it'd help with my therapy, and hopefully help me get to a place in life where I can become self-dependent again. He also said that sharing my story with others could help validate my feelings and help me see that what happened wasn't my fault. So, I figured I'd kill two birds with one stone and just post it here. For you to fully understand my story, I need to give some background. To start, my name is Grayson Miller, and I'm 25 years old. The town I live in, which is a small town in rural South Dakota, has a system of tunnels that run underneath the city. It mostly consists of smaller drainage tunnels, about 3 by 3 feet. But where all these tunnels eventually meet up forms a single large tunnel. This main tunnel spans about 2 miles in a single direction and is about 7 by 10 feet. This tunnel is called the Sheep Tunnel. It was given this name because this used to be the tunnel that local farmers would use to bypass the town's streets while transporting their sheep to and from the nearby mountains, near Black Elk Peak, if you know where that is. But now it's filled with graffiti and trash. The local teens and college students often visit this tunnel as a sort of test of courage. I myself have been here with friends several times in high school for similar reasons. Though, one unspoken rule of the tunnels is that you never visit by yourself. Not because the tunnels themselves are a danger. The people who are rumored to live in them are. When I was in high school, the younger brother of my friend, Barry Bronson, went missing when he was dared to walk the length of the Sheep Tunnel alone. When Barry never showed up at the other end, his friends became worried and notified the police. Despite countless hours of searching, no one was able to find him. About 2 months after he was reported missing, a group of college students stumbled across his body. Barry was found at the main entrance of the Sheep Tunnel, a couple yards back from the opening. He was completely dismembered. The body was positioned on a small wooden platform and decorated around a tall wooden stake coming up from the middle of the platform. Based on the color of the blood and the state the flesh was in, it was apparent that it was recently placed there. The head was removed from the neck and put into an incision just below the rib cage so that the face of the head jutted out, replacing the stomach. Sticking out from around the head were the small and large intestine, cut into strands, as if they were vines dangling off a long-forgotten statue. The arms were also taken from their sockets and inserted in different locations on the torso. His right arm stuck out from his back and was positioned in a way that made it look like the hand was receiving a gift. His left arm was inserted in a hole where the left trapezius should have been. The arm bent over the neck and came down the front of the chest. The hand was positioned with the pointer finger, the middle finger, and the thumb all extended pointing down towards the ground, palm facing out. Both of the legs were removed from the hip joint and were wrapped around the waist as if they were a belt. There was also a passage of sorts written on the wall next to the sculpture. It read, "Verily I say unto thee, physical perfection in this mortal realm is nigh unto impossible to attain. Yet, through the might and dominion of Mammon, all things shall come to fruition according to his will. Behold, Mammon's wife." Law enforcement scoured the tunnels and surrounding area for months, looking for any evidence or clues for who might have done this. but quickly, all leads ran cold. The sheep tunnel was permanently closed off, using rebar to gate off the entrances. Every so often, people still go missing from this town. It's always blamed on the sheep tunnel. Barry's funeral was held at the church I attended. I sat next to my friend Sawyer, Barry's older brother. Sawyer and I had been friends for as long as I can remember, yet I found myself speechless as to how to help console my friend at this time. I remember Priest Malcolm gave some sermon about how this town is festering in a demonic presence and that we need to cleanse it. I don't remember much from the funeral. I really only remember how uncomfortable I felt at how inappropriate it seemed to be saying that instead of giving some blessing to Barry or his family. About a year had passed since the funeral, and the town was still in shock from the scene that had been found. But Sawyer and I had just graduated high school and were figuring out what to do to celebrate. We discussed various activities for our graduation celebration, sitting in the grass at a park. Somehow we found ourselves talking about paranormal hotspots. Why don't we just go to Deadwood? It's not that far from here, and I've heard it's got tons of haunted places, I said. Sawyer was less enthused. Okay, yeah, but it's a major tourist spot. If we go somewhere haunted, I don't want to be dragged around by some tour guide. I'd hate that. I nodded in agreement. I also had the same reservations of going to a major tourist destination. I too hated tour guides. I'd much rather just explore an area for myself. I thought for a second, still wanting to do something with the paranormal. Looking back on this conversation, I wish I had never come up with this idea. What kind of friend would ever suggest something like this? I hate myself for ever having the idea. Well, there's that new psychic that I've heard about who just opened up their business. Why don't we go there? That could be cool, Sawyer said. But that's not that big of a celebration. I want to do something more memorable, his head resting on his hands. Fair. But what if we ask the psychic for information about the tunnels? There's got to be something paranormal in there. Sawyer froze, understanding what I was suggesting. You want us to ask the psychic about Barry? He was sacrificed to the devil, Grayson. Why would you even bring that up? What is wrong with you? He started to get up from the grass. My stomach twisted, and my face became flush. In the poorly formed brain of an 18-year-old, I didn't realize how messed up what I said was until I heard Sawyer's reaction. Nothing's wrong with me. He wasn't sacrificed to the devil. That's just a rumor. My pride made me defensive. I paused and then continued. Don't you want to find out what happened to your brother? There's got to be someone who knows. And if the police were useless in figuring it out, maybe a psychic could help. I was pulling crap out of the air, trying to find some defense for how absolutely inconsiderate I had been. But deep down, I knew that we both wanted to find justice for Barry. Sawyer stared at me, disgust on his face. Just shut up, Sawyer said as he walked away. I could see tears forming in his eyes. I knew I was in the wrong, so I kept my mouth shut. About a week had passed without any contact from Sawyer. I knew I should reach out to apologize, but once again, I was a prideful brat. I laid in my bed, lost in thought, when my phone rang. It was Sawyer. I think you're sick for bringing it up, but I want to know what happened to Barry before he died. My family has been falling apart since his death, and I want to find justice for him. I didn't know how to respond. Yeah, me too. Tomorrow, Sawyer said. We'll see the psychic tomorrow. Sleep didn't come easily to me that night. My mind was running rampant with ideas and possibilities of what could come. My thoughts were split up into 3 parts. 1. I am very skeptical of psychics. I think a lot of them are con artists who take advantage of people who do believe in the supernatural and want some sort of contact with the great beyond. 2. There's a possibility that some psychics are real and actually have some sort of connection to the supernatural or are just more in tune with their spiritual side than other people. 3. My own personal belief of ghosts or hauntings is that typically they don't happen. On occasions, I believe that certain places can hold dark spirits or evil feelings. But one thing I believe wholeheartedly is that when you speak of the devil, he will come. The next day I pulled up to Sawyer's house at the time that we had discussed. He came out to my car when he saw me pull up. You sure you still want to do this? I asked. Sawyer took a breath. Yeah, I'm sure. My family hasn't been the same since what happened. I want to help bring closure by finding the monster who did that to my brother." The psychic had opened up shop in a strip mall in Rapid City, which was only about a 30-minute drive from where we lived. On our way there, we listened to music, mostly the band Gorillaz. Luckily, the music helped break the tension between us, and we were able to joke and talk how we used to. The time passed by quickly, and in no time we pulled up to the street the psychic's shop was on. When we pulled into the parking lot of the plaza, there weren't any parking spots close to the psychic, but as we drove past it, we saw the name Miss Scylla's Dark Arts Emporium. Weird, I mumbled under my breath. We had to park on the other side of the parking lot in order to find a spot. Sawyer and I got out of my car and began walking. We passed by a deli shop as a sheriff and deputy walked out. "Sheriff Nelson?" Sawyer said. I looked over, surprised that Sawyer knew them. "You're that Bronson boy." "Sawyer, was it?" Sheriff Nelson responded. "Yeah, how have you been doing?" "I've been good, just taking my lunch break," the sheriff laughed. He was a larger man, but was kind. Sawyer and the sheriff had some small talk, and we were soon on our way. "How do you know him?" I asked. He was one of the officers who worked on Bronson's case. He helped a lot and led almost every single search effort into the tunnels. He's a good man. My family grew close to him. We reached the Emporium. There was a sign in the window that read, "Palm readings, tarot cards, and scrying." We walked in and a little bell chimed. Somewhere in the back, an older woman called, "I'll be there in just a minute." The first thing I noticed about this place was the smell. It had an old musty scent, almost like a library, but with a faint smell of rot mixed in. The second thing I noticed was a large painting in the back of the room. It was a fiery landscape. On the left in the painting was a mound of gold. A throne sat in the middle. There was a demon sitting on the throne. Gold-encrusted horns were protruding from its head, and it wore a headdress that was decorated in jewels. There was nothing particularly scary about the painting, but I shuddered from it. We looked around the store for a brief moment. It was filled with chintzy trinkets. There were animal bones, spell books, dark fantasy paintings, role-playing dice, and various other seemingly useless items. I was not impressed. We heard footsteps coming from behind a curtain that was behind the checkout counter. The curtain parted, and out walked an old lady. Her hair was gray and long, with a dreaded lock in the front that had a feather and what looked to be small bones woven into it, about the size you'd see from a cat. Her face was wrinkled, and she had deep brown eyes. Her outfit, though, looked like she had found a gypsy costume at Spirit Halloween. "Well, hello," the old woman cooed. "What can I help you with?" A little put off by her appearance, expecting something more authentic, I forgot to speak. So Sawyer shot up. "We're here for some advice or guidance with some questions we have about the supernatural. There was an incident that we wanted your help with." The woman smiled warmly at us. "Follow me back here." We walked with her back behind the curtain, past a few stacks of dusty boxes, and into a room that was also blocked by curtains. As the woman parted them, we went inside and sat down at a small round table that had a black cloth with a dark red trim that draped over the top of the table. Atop the table was a crystal ball that had a metal, demonic-looking hand as the base. Sawyer shot me a look that said, "We're going to waste our money on this old goat?" I shrugged and cocked my head to the side, saying, "We'll see what happens. I'll pay." The old woman looked at us both slowly. "So what do you want to know?" Sawyer spoke first. He started out slow. "About a year ago, my brother went missing. Everyone in our town searched everywhere. 2 weeks later, we found out that my brother was murdered. Not only was he murdered, his entire body was dismembered and positioned into some..." His voice cut out. "Like some sort of statue," he said softly. I could see him reliving the moment the police told him what happened to his brother in his head. "Not only that," I whispered. "There was an almost scripture-like passage on the wall. It talked about mammon. I know in the Bible it talks about mammon, but as wealth. This mammon had the M capitalized, like it was a name. Do you know what that is?" A silent grin crept across the woman's face. "Mammon." She said it in a whisper, but with more force behind it than I thought possible. When she said it, darkness settled in the room. A weight fell on everyone around the table, almost as if I were being forced down into my chair. Mammon is one of the 7 demon lords, the lord of greed and wealth. He wants all, and he will take all. What did he want with my brother? Sawyer leaned forward as he asked, waiting for the answer with eagerness and fear. One can't say for certain, but I could guess that it wasn't Mammon himself who wanted your brother, but someone who was trying to gain something from Mammon. Sawyer and I both froze, lead building in our stomachs. Tears began to form in Sawyer's eyes, and his voice wavered. What could they gain from mutilating my brother? The old woman's eyes flickered. Do you want to find out? Her grin becoming more prominent. Sawyer and I glanced at each other. I could see so many emotions flashing through my friend's eyes. Sorrow, curiosity, but mostly fear. Sawyer looked at the psychic. I want to know. The old woman put her hands on the crystal ball and let out a breath that sounded like a death rattle. Her body trembled slightly, her eyes fixed on the ball, and she muttered some words I couldn't understand. I felt a presence entering the room. It literally felt as if someone else had walked into the room and was standing behind us. I shot a look behind me, yet saw nothing. The room was even darker now. I looked over at Sawyer. His eyes were glued to the woman and the ball, tears running down his face. A gurgle escaped the woman's mouth, and she began breathing heavily. Fear had masked her face. She started looking around the room as if she was trying to see something. Then she spoke. Who's there? Her voice was no longer an old woman's voice, and it sounded familiar. Tommy? Sawyer? Is that you? If that's you, this isn't funny. Get out of there. Sawyer began actively crying, soft moans coming from his mouth as tears poured down his face. Be Barry. He screamed. The old woman didn't acknowledge Sawyer. She suddenly screamed in that same young boy's voice, Barry's voice. Who are you? Sawyer! Sawyer! Help me! The woman began moving around as if she were running, her hands still connected to the crystal ball. Her body jolted and she groaned. Her body began inching like a worm, and she craned her head to look behind herself. Please! Please stop! Don't kill me. Please don't kill me. Then the psychic began gurgling and shaking. Suddenly she smashed her head into the table and lay motionless. Sawyer was now sobbing. He was trying to get up from his chair, but his limbs were weak. Tears were streaming down my face too, but I got up and grabbed Sawyer, helping him to his feet. As I got my friend up, the old woman sat up in her chair and shot over the table, knocking it over and landing on top of me. Mammon! 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 She kept screaming it in my face over and over again. I fought to get her off of me. Sawyer and I were both screaming as we tried to get her off of me. She pulled a small bone out of her hair and stabbed me in the side with it. As soon as she did, she stopped screaming, got off of me, and ran deeper into her store. I felt blood pooling down my side, but we didn't hesitate for a single moment. We sprinted out of the store, accidentally knocking over a vase of fake eyeballs on the way out. We drove about 10 miles out of the city and pulled over on the side of the road. Sawyer was an emotional wreck, and I wasn't much better off. My side was soaked in blood, and I was feeling woozy. That feeling of darkness still hadn't left me. Whatever was in that shop was evil. I had never felt something like that in my entire life up to this point. Nonetheless, I knew the wound in my side was the first problem that needed to be addressed. Sawyer, can you drive? I'm having trouble seeing straight right now. Sawyer looked over at me and saw the blood on my hand. He quickly wiped the tears from his face and locked in. Yeah, I'm fine. I can drive. We drove to the instant care. Even though I was actively bleeding, we sat in the waiting room for almost 15 minutes before the doctor called us back. I was treated with antibiotics and easily sewn up. Sawyer took me home as we sat in silence in the car. How do you even talk about what happened? As the young men that we were, we struggled talking about how we felt for small and simple things, let alone something as traumatic as what we had experienced. We pulled up to my house as the sun was setting, and Sawyer dropped me and my car off. He walked home. His house was only a block away. I walked into my house, carefully avoiding my parents. I didn't want to have to explain the blood and my mental state, and I walked into my room. Carefully laying myself down on my bed, avoiding my hurt side, I quickly fell asleep, overcome by exhaustion. As quickly as I fell asleep, I began to dream. In my dream, I was in an aspen grove on a trail. The trail itself was littered with leaves. I looked up. It was dusk. As I walked down the trail, there was no sound in the trees. No birds chirping, no crickets singing, nothing. I remember when I was younger and in a scout group, our leader taught us that when the forest goes silent, danger is near. Remembering this, my senses heightened and fear began to overwhelm me. I quickened my pace down the trail. Suddenly, the forest around me darkened. I looked up, surprised that nightfall came so soon, but it hadn't. It was still dusk. A sickening dread fell over me and I struggled to breathe. I fell on my knees and put my face in my hands, trying to calm myself. After a few moments, I looked up from my hands. But what I saw wasn't the forest I was just in. My eyes took a second to adjust to the darkness I was now experiencing. I looked up at the sky once again and saw stars. It was nighttime. I looked forward and saw a wall of rebar blocking a long, dark tunnel. My stomach twisted as I realized where I was. Sitting before me was the entrance to a place I hadn't been to in a long time. Sitting before me was the entrance to the sheep tunnel. I'm going to stop my story here for now. Recounting all of these memories has brought back a lot of pain. I need a break. I'll try writing down more of what happened by next week. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream could ever be. Story 5. The Message in the Mirror. It all started with a mirror. I just moved into a new apartment, an old Victorian house that had been divided into several units. The place was charming, if a bit eerie, with its creaky wooden floors and winding hallways. But the most peculiar thing was the mirror in the bathroom. A large, ornate piece with intricate carvings and a heavy gold frame. I remember the day I first noticed it. I was unpacking my things, trying to make the space feel more like home. The mirror was covered in dust, its surface dark and cloudy. I decided to clean it, thinking it would brighten up the small, dimly lit bathroom. As I polished the glass, I noticed something odd. There was a faint smudge on the mirror's surface that wouldn't come off. I assumed it was just stubborn dirt and continued cleaning. That's when I saw it. An inscription, faint but legible, scrawled in what looked like dried blood. The message read, "Help me." I laughed it off, convincing myself it was probably just a prank from the previous tenant. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I looked into that mirror, I felt a chill, as if I were being watched. One night, I was jolted awake by a loud crash. My heart raced as I stumbled out of bed and into the bathroom. The mirror was shattered on the floor. I looked around, but there was no sign of anyone else in the apartment. I swept up the glass, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread. The following morning, I decided to replace the mirror. I went to a local antique shop and found a beautiful, vintage piece that seemed to fit the apartment's character. As I hung it in the bathroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Maybe a new mirror would dispel the unease. But the new mirror didn't bring any comfort. If anything, it made things worse. The strange feeling of being watched intensified. I began to notice odd things happening. Objects moving on their own, strange noises in the middle of the night, and a persistent, unexplained cold spot in the bathroom. One evening, I was reading in the living room when I heard a whisper coming from the bathroom. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to my imagination, but the whispers grew louder and more insistent. That's when I decided to investigate. I placed a recorder in the bathroom, hoping to capture any unusual sounds. When I played back the recording, I was horrified. The whispers were unmistakable, and they were saying, "Please help me, he's coming." I tried to find out more about the apartment's history, but there were no records or mentions of anything unusual. It was as if the place had been wiped clean. My neighbors were equally unhelpful, either avoiding the topic or giving vague, unsettling answers. Determined to uncover the truth, I did some research on the mirror. I discovered it was part of a set that had been sold at an estate sale several decades ago. The original owner, a woman named Eliza Blackwood, had died under mysterious circumstances. There were rumors that she had been involved in dark rituals, and that her spirit had been trapped in the mirrors she owned. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that something sinister was happening. I tried to remove the mirror, but it was as if it was glued to the wall. The whispering grew louder, and the cold spot became unbearable. I could see my breath in the bathroom, even though the rest of the apartment was warm. Desperate, I contacted a local paranormal investigator. They came over, set up their equipment, and performed a cleansing ritual. During the ritual, the temperature in the room dropped drastically, and the investigators reported seeing shadowy figures moving around. After the cleansing, the activity seemed to lessen. The whispers stopped, and the cold spot disappeared. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The mirror remained, though now it seemed just a regular, old piece of glass. I'm not sure what happened in that bathroom, whether it was a trick of the mind, a malevolent spirit, or something else entirely. I can't say for certain. All I know is that I'm moving out. The mirror will stay, and with it, the mystery that I can't seem to unravel. If you ever find yourself in an old Victorian house with a strange mirror, maybe think twice before cleaning it. Some messages are better left unread, and just when they thought it was safe, the terror crept back in, stronger than before. Story 6. The legislator is hunting me down. How much more are you going to handle? I faced the facts and asked myself this, and I ultimately did what had to be done. For a menial job, I was surprisingly content on my way to work that day. It feels like forever, but it was only 2 weeks ago. It was a nice, cool fall morning, coffee in hand, walking down the sidewalk in downtown Albany, the heart of New York State's capital region. Nothing is glamorous about Albany, though, but I'm okay with that. It was my first job out of college, just to have some cash coming in. I worked in the bowels of the legislative office building, the mailroom. It was a very typical bustling mailroom you may see in movies. It matched the fast-paced political environment it was contained within. No time for making personal connections or active listening. Just go, go, go. I walked through the side entrance to the legislative building I normally walk through. The 2 security guards, Rick and Johnny, were there. I walked through the metal detector. It went off because of my belt or something. They never cared anyway. I just walked on through with my coffee, which they also shouldn't have let me bring in. Rick greeted me. "Zach, rise and shine. How's it going?" I replied, "Not much, heading downstairs." Johnny asked, "Are you meeting us for lunch?" I replied, "Depends how busy today is, but I'll talk to you later." I headed down the stairs, 4 short flights, before entering the swinging doors of the mailroom. It was much busier than normal. Everyone was sorting through boxes on boxes of mail. On top of this, a mail truck was backing up into the loading port to drop off more mail. My boss, Don, a bald, angry Italian-American man, was on the phone attached to the wall. Don spoke, irritated and in a hurry, so nothing out of the ordinary. "No, no way. We are at capacity right now. We can't do that. I'm balls deep in mail and print orders. It's not happening, Paul." Pause for reply. "It's in the budget." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking to you on a corded phone like it's the 1950s. "All right, bye." Don hung up the phone and saw that I had just walked in. "Don't get comfortable, Zach. I'm sending you upstairs. Chug that coffee or throw it out, then come with me." Don belittlingly clapped his hands a few times to signal me to keep it moving, as you would to a dog or cattle. I chugged my coffee, threw it out, and started walking to Don's office. I walked past Carl, who I met when I first started working there. We got close and created moments of fun in this tedious job of ours. Carl smirked at me, knowing I was already overwhelmed with the workday. "Buckle up," Carl said. When I walked into Don's office, he pointed to 3 large boxes that were stacked on top of each other. The top one is mail for the 4th floor. The middle one is a print order for room 915, the bottom for room 917. Put them on a dolly and head on up. Come right back down when you're done. We're swamped. I nodded and grabbed a dolly. I got dizzy for a moment. The hecticness must have really getting to me already. While restacking the boxes, I got curious and opened the ones that were print orders. Both were rally or protest signs legislators ordered. Room 915's had signs that read, "Defund the MTA," while room 917's had signs that read, "Black Cops Matter." I sighed, politically exhausted like everyone else in this state and country, and closed up the boxes. I went to the elevator with the dolly to the 4th floor. I was particularly excited that I got assigned to deliver mail on the 4th floor. That's where Jacob works, for Legislator Brunsfield's office. He's a receptionist. Even in that role, he particularly has it rough, being in the trenches of politics. I get to retreat to the basement while he has to stay in the middle of it all for 8 hours. I've had a crush on him at this point for quite some time now, and it's clear the feeling is mutual. I'm going to ask him out on a date soon. I just have to find the time. While handing out mail, making my way down the hall to Jacob's office, Legislator Brunsfield happened to speed walk by in an oversized and ill-fitting suit, fumbling with some papers in a stack he was holding. He slowed down momentarily when he saw me. "Ah, Zach, you can give anything you have to Jacob. Also, can you keep an eye out for a large manila envelope? I'm expecting something important." The legislator kept on walking. I replied back to myself sarcastically in a whisper. "Yeah, I'll sit still and wait patiently for it." I finally got to the legislator's office. I left the dolly outside next to the door and walked in. Jacob stopped what he was doing, saw me, and gave me a warm smile from the front desk. I tried not to get flustered. I gave him a slight smile back. "Busy day for you too?" I said. In a flirty, teasing way, Jacob replied. "Not at all. Pretty calm, actually." I replied back in the same way. "Your boss is busy, rushing to a meeting, and you're in here doing nothing?" Jacob rolled his eyes in response. He barely knows where he's going half the time. I had to tell him to tie his shoes like a toddler before he left. The phone rang. "One sec," Jacob said and answered the phone. "Legislator Brunsfield's office?" No, we oppose the bill." "I mean, I can send you to his legislative director, but she's going to tell you the same thing." Pause for reply. "I know, because you're not the first person to ask." "Okay, thanks." Jacob hung up the phone. "Nothing like being called an asshole before 9 in the morning," he continued. "You have mail for me?" "Nothing," I said. "Really? Do you have a large manila envelope by any chance?" I replied, "I'm aware, but no." Jacob smirked. "Where are you heading to now? Or can you stay and chat for a bit?" "Sorry, I'm heading to the 9th floor. I have some print orders to deliver." After I said this, I got dizzy again. So Jacob wouldn't notice I was trying to catch my balance, I put my hand on the wall to casually lean on it. It went away after a few seconds. "For who?" Jacob asked. 9:15 and 9:17, I replied. Jacob's smile vanished. His eyes went wide, but only for a moment. He knew he was making a face, but tried to hide it. His face almost immediately went flush. Pale. He looked sick, like he was going to throw up. I'll talk to you later," Jacob said. As he finished his sentence, the phone rang again. Jacob eagerly picked it up to get out of talking to me. He even turned his head and body partially away from me. It was so unlike him. Clearly it had to do with the rooms I was delivering print orders to, but such a strong response to it was concerning. Surprised by Jacob's bizarre behavior and how I didn't want to bother him by waiting for the phone call to end, I just left. I got the dolly and got on the elevator again to the 9th floor. I stepped out of the elevator and headed to room 915. While wheeling the dolly there, I realized, out of all the offices I've delivered mail to, these 2 rooms I don't believe I've ever been to. A weird coincidence, I guess. But I've delivered mail on the 9th floor a million times. I brushed it off and kept walking down the hall. When I got to room 915, the door was already open. I went in and saw a woman around my age at the front desk. "Hello, you sent in a print order?" I said. The woman at the front desk replied, seemingly excited to see me. "Hi, yes, or I guess so. I wasn't the one that placed it. You can put it right here on my desk." After I put the box of defund the MTA signs on her desk, she extended her hand. "Thank you so much. I'm Samantha." "Zach," I replied and shook her hand. She opened the box in front of me, and her smile went away as she groaned. "Oh God, not this," Samantha said, referencing the topic of the rally signs. "It's so embarrassing we're supporting this." Ugh. Add that to the list of issues. I paused before replying. "Then why do you work for this legislator?" Samantha ignored my question as though she'd been asked that before. She went back to her chipper mood. "Well, thanks again," she said. She saw the last box I had on the dolly. "Is that for us too?" I got dizzy again. This was very strange for me. I figured it was probably just coffee being the only thing in my system. It went away before I needed to sit or lean up against something. "No," I replied. "It's for next door, 9117. Samantha went silent. Immediately, an anxious energy washed over her that she was failing to cover up, just like Jacob. She tried to say the following smoothly, but it came out all choppy. She put on a forced smile with it to try and blunt the clear discomfort. "Oh, okay. I'll let you get back to your day. Thank you." She immediately started to walk behind me to usher me out the door. Once my full body and the dolly were outside the office, she quickly closed the door. What alarmed me the most, besides her and Jacob's strong initial reactions to, now realizing, specifically room 917, was that after Samantha closed the door, I could hear her softly begin to cry. I was scared. I was mostly confused, but now I was scared. Maybe I am unaffected. Maybe they are just experiencing something in the political realm that to me will just be interpreted as a rude legislator to interact with. Maybe he voted for or against something recently that is invoking an emotional reaction in them. I don't know. I'm just delivering a print order. I went next door to room 917 and knocked. "Hello, print delivery." No one answered. I opened the unlocked door and went inside with the dolly. No one was at the front desk. I heard talking from within the office, but didn't know where it was coming from. Completely strange. The white, fluorescent lights of the main room I was in turned red. I wondered if that was an odd choice the office made, or an electrical issue? That's stupid. I don't know why red lights would be here. I opened a door within the office and saw it was the office's conference room. It was empty. The lights in the conference room also turned red. I just closed the door. I wanted to get out of the office ASAP. I walked toward a back room and realized that was where the talking was coming from. The conversation was tense, angry. As I got closer, I saw the door where the talking was coming from was half open. The lights in that room were already red. It was weird. My ears started to have a very slight ringing, while simultaneously the feeling I had was like I had placed a small amount of cotton balls in them. I told myself that this and the dizziness must be dehydration. I told myself I would grab a water bottle after I dropped off this print order. There also seemed to be a heat coming from this back room as I got closer. The heat came in waves, or pulsating vibrations. The legislature is an old building. It was probably just how the heat was being pumped into the office, or maybe another symptom I was having. From around the corner, I saw who I believed to be the legislator of room 917. He was standing behind a desk. Across from him sat a man in a pinstripe suit, facing away from me. On the ground, I could partially see a man around my age. He was sobbing. The legislator began to beat the man on the ground with a belt as the man attempted to shield himself with his arm. "What did I say? What did I tell you?" the legislator said. The man on the ground replied, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "How could you not know, you fucking idiot? How could you?" The man on the ground persisted in apologizing. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." "Now I have to fix this," the legislator said. Referencing the man sitting in the chair, the legislator continued, "This is embarrassing. Do you know how this makes me look?" While looking briefly at the man in the chair, the legislator saw me looking from around the corner. The man on the ground sees me too. Laying there on his side, still shielding himself, he gave me a sad yet intense look that could only be interpreted as one word, or at least how I felt it to be: run. I bolted out of the office. I left my dolly there with the print order still on it. I needed to find somewhere quick to hide. My immediate reaction was to go back to room 915 since it was right there, and that's exactly what I did. I ran in and closed the door back behind me. I leaned up against the door, frozen. Samantha was at her desk. She was of course startled, trying to process what I just witnessed. I could still connect the dots. She was surprised but not shocked. We looked at each other in silence for maybe 2 seconds, but as cliché as it was, it seemed like an eternity. "Run," she said, her voice shaking, but attempting to be as supportive as possible. I couldn't help it. I still remained frozen. She said, more assertive, "Run." I didn't even bother to check first to see if the legislator or even the other man that was sitting with him was in the hallway. I just ran. I ran toward the stairwell. The adrenaline had me easily running all the way down from the 9th floor back to the main floor, where I entered the building for work. I went to the security checkpoint I entered. I was looking for Rick and Johnny. Their security. They would know how to handle this. But they weren't there. In fact, no one was there. The normally busiest floor of the legislative building, filled with staffers, building workers, tourists, and protesters, was completely empty. "Hello?" I yelled. My voice echoed. My confusion and fear only worsened. Where is everyone? Was there some sort of evacuation? A fire? A gas leak? An active shooter? I kept running down the stairs to the mailroom. I went through the swinging doors, and there he was, standing there across the room. The legislator. His feet were planted firmly on the floor, arms crossed. I know it's an odd way to describe it, but he looked like an angry, disappointed father. Only Carl was in the mailroom with him. Don and all of the other mailroom workers were gone. Carl was sorting through mail in the same spot I had seen him before. Carl saw me standing near the door, looking back and forth between him and the legislator. Carl said nothing. What the hell is happening? All I could muster to Carl was, "Have you seen Don?" Carl replied, "He went upstairs. I think he went to the HR office for something. He should be back in a moment." At this point, I couldn't believe I was able to panic even more. I ran away, back upstairs. Maybe Rick and Johnny would be back at their post. Maybe I could find Don. I got to the main floor. Still, not a single person was there. I got dizzy again. This time, it was severe. I fell but stopped myself from hitting the ground with both hands. There was a gun. In the middle of the cold marble floor lay a handgun. After my dizziness subsided, I looked around. Was someone waiting for me to pick it up? I slowly approached the gun, looked around again, and picked it up. I took the magazine out. It had exactly 2 bullets. My confusion and fear transformed. I was now furious. I'm just a mailroom worker. Clearly the legislator was doing all of this. How so quickly, I'm unsure. After witnessing his violent act, I realized I could not avoid his sudden orchestrated revenge toward me. To silence me. He clearly planted this gun. If he wanted to play this game with me, I was going to make sure he regretted it. I wasn't going to handle this cowardly. I was going to stand up for myself. Gun in hand, I went back down to the mailroom. Though the legislator could have taken the elevator upstairs, the mailroom elevator was designated for mailroom personnel only through specialized keys that needed to be turned before pressing floor buttons. I didn't see him come up the stairs, so I was almost certain the legislator was still down there, waiting for me. So I went to him. When I got back to the mailroom, my anger only worsened. Where the legislator was, standing in the same way, was the man in the pinstriped suit. Again, he was facing away from me. Carl was still nonchalantly sorting through mail. The man, still facing away from me, pulled out a handgun from his suit jacket pocket and held it to his side. I shot. I hit the man in the leg. He fell to the ground. Carl covered his head and ducked under the table he was working at. In my path of fury, I must have not seen the legislator hiding in the corner of the mailroom behind me. He charged. I held my gun up, ready to shoot, but he got me before I fired. He tackled me to the ground, and that's all I remember before things went black. I woke up to the sound of knocking and a heavy metal door opening. "Wake up," a man said. "Your lawyer is here to see you." The man who opened the door was a police officer. I was in a jail cell. I was extremely groggy and exhausted. I had no more fight in me. My anger went back to confusion, and the exhaustion had replaced my fear. I came out of the cell and started walking to another room with a man who was standing next to the cop. "Hi, Zach," the man said. "I'm a public defender. I've been assigned to your case." When we got to a room to speak privately, he explained to me what he read in the police reports, and I explained to him what happened to me. My version. What my lawyer told me was when I had entered the legislative building to go to work, I had a handgun hidden on me. The security guards, Rick and Johnny, who I have known for a bit now, did not pat me down when I set off the metal detector. Both Rick and Johnny were arrested and charged with crimes related to failing to uphold their duties, especially in a government building. Some sort of criminal negligence charges. With the gun apparently under my shirt, I just started my workday. Security cameras saw me go to the mailroom, leave, deliver mail to the 4th floor, go into Legislator Brunsfield's office, then head to the 9th floor to deliver the print orders. Well, my lawyer told me I had only one print order for room 915. The cameras saw me go to room 915, drop off the print order, and then I went back in the elevator down to the mailroom. I was told I then dropped my dolly off and walked back up the stairs to the main floor, where I then stood there. I stood there and did nothing for a full minute. People walking around me, looking at me, wondering what I was doing. I then walked back downstairs to the mailroom, where I was told I then shot Don in the leg. Before I could shoot anyone else, multiple of my coworkers in the mailroom tackled and subdued me. My lawyer listened to my experience. What I went through, he really did listen. In the defense of my case, my lawyer decided it was best to go with exactly that. My experience. I learned more during the 3-day trial when witnesses were called to the stand. The witnesses were everyone I interacted with that day and more. Legislator Brunsfield was one of the first witnesses. When questioned by both the prosecutor and my attorney, he reiterated multiple times, "The security footage shows I never interacted with Mr. Michael, me that day, nor was I even at the legislature." Legislator Brunsfield stated he was at a public campaign event during the hours I was at work. His alibi checked out as the press were there covering it. Jacob was called to the stand after his boss was questioned. I for sure thought Jacob would understand what went through. Sitting there while being asked questions, his eyes would dart back to me and the person questioning him. He looked scared, disturbed. I realized he was scared of me. My heart sunk into itself. He told the prosecutor when I came in to drop off mail to Legislator Brunsfield's office that I seemed anxious and handed him a large manila envelope and left without saying a word. When he opened the envelope, there was only one piece of copy paper in it. One big word was written, traced over and over again with a pen. Run. Jacob said he thought it was very strange, but that maybe I was playing some weird game with him. He said he was going to ask me about it the next time I dropped by the office. But of course, that next time never came. Jacob said he should have taken it seriously and began to tear up. When Samantha took the stand, she said I also seemed anxious. Samantha said that since we had never met before, she introduced herself, but that I didn't respond and I just left the office after I dropped off the box. Who took the stand next, though only briefly, was the legislator, the one from room 917. I learned then his last name was Velar. He did not look like either of the 3 men I saw in the office that day. Though he was not scared like Jacob was, he was clearly also disturbed. He said while being questioned that he was shocked that Mr. McCall wanted to hurt me. Because 1, he and I had never met before, and 2, the day this all transpired was a fairly normal day for him. He was shaken up at the fact that he had no idea he was in possible danger. Security footage apparently showed that I never even stepped foot in his office. Carl took the stand next. Confusion is really the theme of all of this, and that's exactly how he looked, sad and confused, at me. Carl described, like the rest of them, that I came to work seemingly anxious and hyper-aware of my surroundings. The only thing Carl said that I said to him that day was "morning," in response to Carl saying "good morning" to me. The next time he saw me was after he ducked under the table when I fired the gun, shooting Don. Don walked, or more so hobbled in with a full leg cast on with a set of crutches. The court transcriber had to get up to help him in and out of the witness booth. Don said he was really busy that day and wasn't paying that much attention to my behavior when I got to work. Overall, he said I seemed fine. When I got back to the mailroom, Don said he saw me standing at the doorway doing nothing, just staring at him from across the room. But before he could ask me what was wrong or why I was just staring at him, I pulled out the gun and shot him in the leg. I don't know why they were saving Rick and Johnny for last, but they did. Rick and Johnny came in individually, in their prison jail jumpsuits, handcuffed. They both said the same thing, that I seemed off, that Rick said good morning to me, and that I didn't respond. They both admitted that neither of them did anything when I set off the metal detector because they would never suspect me of causing any harm. From there, multiple people in the mailroom were questioned. I kind of spaced out from there. The consensus of what they were saying was that it was a normal workday up until then. Of 5 of my coworkers questioned, 3 were part of the group that supposedly tackled me and got the gun out of my hand. They also said that they noticed that I went limp and unconscious before I hit the ground, which was confirmed by the doctor who examined me and said I had no head trauma, meaning my head didn't hit the ground, at least not severely when I was tackled. My lawyer was very smart. He was compassionate, But he knew he didn't want me to know that he didn't believe my story either, like everyone else. I didn't even realize till the trial neared its conclusion that my lawyer was pleading guilty by insanity on my behalf. The prosecutors didn't accept that as a plea deal. Due to my prior lack of mental health history, they argued that this was a premeditated act, though for an unknown reason. They tried to push the overworked, angry at my boss motive, but it seemed to go nowhere. This was a non-jury trial, so the judge had the final say. She found me guilty by insanity on 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder as a first-time offender, shooting Don, and aiming my gun at my coworkers. Now here I am, writing from a psych institution where I am to stay for 12 consecutive years. It truly sucks. They treat everyone the same, whether you're writhing on the ground, screaming and having a mental breakdown, or completely sane like me. That was not how the day played out. What everyone said happened is not what happened. I was being hunted down for seeing something I shouldn't have. I'm still being hunted down. I was lucky enough in general, but especially on the 4th floor, to get a room here that has a window. As I write this, he's looking at me. Arms crossed, the real legislator is standing on the ground outside my window looking up at me. He wants his revenge, and I'm not going to let him have it. I'm not going to just handle this and live in fear. Once I get out of here, I'm going to make sure he can't hurt me or anyone else any longer.